Imagine your country has just survived decades of brutal systemic oppression, and suddenly the oppressors and the oppressed are told they have to live side by side now.
Right, right.
Where do you even begin to process that level of trauma? You don't just go to a government office to file some paperwork to get over it. You go to the theater.
Exactly.
You're not.
Because it is, frankly, the most public, visceral space available for a society to just figure out how to function again.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Whether you are catching up on world history, exploring the arts, or you're just incredibly curious about how humans process massive change, you are in the right place.
You really are.
Today, we are exploring this massive stack of notes and research on contemporary South African theater, specifically everything that happened after 1994. Our goal here isn't just to, list a bunch of plays. We want to see how an entire country attempts to reinvent its identity and heal its deepest wounds live on stage.
Yeah, and to really grasp what was happening on those stages, we have to look at the historical baseline. I mean, in 1994, South Africa holds its first democratic elections. Nelson Mandela becomes president. The apartheid regime is dismantled. And, the concept of the Rainbow Nation is born.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more because the way they handled that transition is crucial for everything we're going to talk about.
It really is.
A huge part of this was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC. The country made this deliberate choice to pursue restorative justice. Victims shared their experiences publicly, and perpetrators could apply for amnesty if they fully disclosed the truth. The sources note they chose this over seeking revenge or just pure punitive justice.
Right, and that decision shapes everything we are going to discuss today. Normally, art holds up a mirror to society. But when a society undergoes a tectonic shift like moving from absolute segregation to a nascent democracy, that mirror doesn't just reflect the change. The mirror shatters. The theater we are examining today is literally the process of artists picking up those jagged little pieces and trying to glue them back together, trying to create a reflection that actually makes sense.
Wow, and to understand how they glued it back together, we really need to talk about the political whiplash the country was experiencing because, it directly fueled the art.
Absolutely.
You start with the immense hope of the Mandela years, from 1994 to 1999. The research always points to that iconic moment during the 1995 Rugby World Cup,
Oh, yes.
where Mandela wore the Springbok jersey. It was this massive, documented symbol of unity for a totally fractured nation.
That initial euphoria was profound. But, history always moves forward. And that unity eventually met the very complicated, very messy realities of governance.
Yeah, I was reading through the documentation on the subsequent eras, and the shift is dramatic. You have the Thabo Mbeki years from 1999 to 2008. There was a major push for an African Renaissance and a complete overhaul of the education system.
Right, outcomes-based education.
Exactly, OBE, which was designed to move away from rote memorization and focus on democracy, diversity, and critical thinking.
But parallel to those reforms, the historical record points to a truly devastating HIV and AIDS crisis. The government policies at the time restricted access to certain antiretroviral medications, specifically a drug called nevirapine,
Right.
which was crucial for preventing the transmission of HIV from mothers to their babies.
Yeah, the sources document that this restriction led to thousands of preventable deaths, which in turn sparked massive organized pushback from activist groups like the Treatment Action Campaign or the TAC.
And the political landscape just keeps shifting.
It really does.
Uh,
Kellerman Motlanthe steps in briefly as a caretaker president, a period that the records show was unfortunately marred by tragic outbreaks of xenophobic violence.
Which brings us to 2009 onwards, entering the Jacob Zuma era. And this period is just a fascinating study in contrasts.
Oh, totally. You have these massive global highs, right? Like hosting the 2010 FIFA World Cup, which brought a huge surge of national pride.
Mm-hmm.
But then the documentation from this era also heavily reflects ongoing public frustration.
Yeah.
Frustration over poor basic service delivery and widespread allegations of political corruption. So looking at this timeline, it feels like building a brand new dream house with your community, right? In 1994, everyone is celebrating the house.
Right. Pop the champagne.
Exactly. But then over the next decade, you realize the roof is leaking, the foundation has cracks, and the bills are piling up. Theater essentially became the only way to point out the cracks before the whole house collapsed.
What's fascinating here is the immediate impact this had on the theater scene right after the 1994 elections.
Yeah, this really surprised me.
You would assume that with freedom of speech finally secured, there would just be this explosion of fiery, politically charged theater. But the opposite happened. Political theater actually plummeted.
I was fascinated by that detail.
Yeah.
Why the sudden drop? It seems so counterintuitive.
A few structural things happened at once. The international cultural boycott against South Africa ended, meaning big, flashy international productions could suddenly flood into the country.
Oh, sure.
Simultaneously, the large state-funded performing arts councils, which were remnants of the old regime, began closing down. But psychologically, audiences were just exhausted.
Yeah, tired of fighting.
Exactly. Decades of relentless political struggle. They just wanted escapism.
Yeah.
So the stages filled up with light musicals, cabaret, comedy.
Escapism makes total sense. If you've been fighting for your literal survival for decades, sometimes you just want to sit in the dark and watch people tap dance.
Right.
But I also read about playwright Mike Van Gran, and he highlighted a much darker reason for this shift.
Self-censorship.
Yes, self-censorship.
It's tragic, really. Many artists who had risked their lives fighting for this new democracy were suddenly terrified of criticizing it.
Because it was so new.
Exactly. The new system felt incredibly fragile. There was a real hesitation to be the one pointing out the flaws in the Rainbow Nation. They had all just sacrificed so much to build.
But you can't hold your breath forever.
Right.
That escapism wore off because the reality of living side by side just couldn't be ignored.
No.
Once the confetti from 1994 was swept up, citizens actually had to figure out who they were in this new paradigm. Theater went from, let's just watch a musical, to, wait, who are we now?
That fractured mirror had to be examined. So we see this massive surge in autobiographical plays. Playwrights were using their own raw, lived experiences to untangle what it meant to belong to different demographic groups. Especially in a society where the old labels were suddenly supposed to mean something entirely different.
Yes, the identity plays. There are so many specific examples in the sources, like Dunkerland, processing Afrikaner identity, or Out of Bounds, looking at the Indian-South African experience.
And a colored place, too.
Right. But rather than just listing all of them, I want to zero in on one that really caught my eye in the research. White Men with Weapons.
Oh, Greg Coetzee's piece. Brilliant.
Yeah, written and performed by Greg Coetzee. He didn't just write some academic think piece. He put one guy on stage to completely dismantle the South African military ethos. He explored that deeply ingrained, hyper-masculine white military identity after the fall of the apartheid structure.
It was a profound internal audit for that demographic, showing the audience what happens when the entire framework of your identity is suddenly just obsolete.
Yeah.
And while individuals were figuring out who they were, the broader society had to figure out how to forgive. This is where Theater for Reconciliation comes in, running parallel to the real-world TRC we discussed earlier.
Plays like Nothing But the Truth, right?
Yes, and Truth in Translation. And, of course, the famous Ubu and the Truth Commission. They were tackling the emotional pain of the TRC head-on.
Okay, here is where I really struggle with this concept, and I need to push back a bit.
Sure.
I understand the nobility of restorative justice. But looking at the descriptions of these plays, the process seems unbelievably messy and traumatizing.
It was.
Watching someone reenact apartheid violence in front of a mixed audience, where perpetrators and victims might literally be sitting in the same row, it seems like it could easily backfire. Did staging these plays actually help people process the trauma, or did it just force victims to relive their worst nightmares for the sake of art?
That is the hardest, most dangerous tension in this entire movement. And to answer your question honestly, it absolutely didn't work perfectly every time. Theater wasn't a magic wand granting instant forgiveness.
Right.
But I want you to consider the alternative for a second. When a victim reads a transcript from the TRC or watches it alone on the evening news, they are isolated with that trauma. Think about the echo chambers we all live in today, where we process awful events alone behind our screens.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we just spiral in isolation.
Exactly. What these plays did was provide a contained, physical space to witness the pain collectively. When you sit in a dark room with hundreds of other people and you watch an actor physically embody that trauma, it forces a communal acknowledgement of the truth.
It makes it undeniable.
It prevents a society from looking away. It taught the audience that reconciliation isn't just a policy decision signed on a piece of paper. It is a grueling, active, and deeply uncomfortable process of communication.
A forced communal acknowledgement. That reframes it entirely for me. You can't just scroll past it when the actor's sweating and crying 10 feet in front of you.
And as the new democracy aged, the function of that communal space shifted again. The focus moved away from the sins of the past and locked directly onto the immediate crises of the present.
Right, because by the time we get deep into the Mbeki and Zuma eras, that self-censorship we talked about earlier, it completely vanished.
Oh, entirely.
The research shows this massive pivot toward gritty, unfiltered social commentary. They were holding up that mirror to show the very real cracks in the foundation.
The theater began reflecting societal crises that were just impossible to ignore. For instance, the devastating impact of the drug trade.
Yes, I was reading about a play called My Name is Ellen Packies. It tackles the horrific reality of tick addiction, which is a local form of crystal meth, and the violence it brought into communities.
Based on a true story, too.
Yeah, a real tragic story of a mother dealing with her addicted son. And it wasn't just drugs. They were putting plays on stage about child rape, like Shebang, or religious intolerance in Brothers in Blood.
And let's not forget, Green Man flashing, tackling political corruption directly.
The gloves were completely off.
They were, and as public frustration mounted, especially concerning the corruption allegations during the Zuma era, artists stopped holding back and brought out the sharp knives. We see the rise of intense, biting satire.
Satire like Macbeth, which is a brilliant play on Shakespeare's Macbeth.
Very clever.
Or Mbeki and Other Nightmares.
Yeah.
And even the incredibly popular television and stage puppet show, ZA News. They used extreme mimicry and humor to absolutely roast the political establishment. But I mean, why satire? Why not just write an angry, serious political drama?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, satire serves a very specific survival function. When a society feels overwhelmed by dark, systemic issues, violent crime, an HIV crisis, deeply entrenched corruption citizens feel entirely powerless.
Yeah, the system just feels too big to fight.
Exactly. Laughing at the leaders who are failing them, turning them into exaggerated caricatures, is a way to reclaim a sense of power. It shrinks the terrifying politician down to a manageable, ridiculous size.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Furthermore, a society that can publicly mock its leadership without the artists disappearing in the middle of the night, that is a critical sign of a maturing democracy. It's a stress test for freedom of speech.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. We've talked a lot about the themes they were exploring, but the actual mechanics of how they were putting on these shows was changing completely too.
Driven entirely by basic economics.
Right. With the big state funding gone, independent companies couldn't afford giant, elaborate sets with massive casts. They had to figure out how to put on a compelling show that could be, like, packed into the back of a hatchback.
Necessity breeds invention.
And this necessity led to a massive boom in a monodrama, the one-person show, and specifically physical theater.
Physical theater is a remarkable discipline. It shifts the primary vehicle of storytelling away from spoken dialogue and expensive props and places the entire burden of communication onto movement, mime, dance, and just the visual expressiveness of the human body.
Artists like Andrew Buckland or Athena Mazarakis, and companies like the First Physical Theater Company were really leading this charge.
They were pioneers.
Reading about their techniques, it honestly reminded me of the brilliance of early silent movies. You realize you don't need $1 million set, or honestly even a script, if the human body is trained to be expressive enough.
Absolutely.
An actor can convey complex political oppression or deep personal grief just by the way they contort their spine or manipulate an empty chair on a bare stage.
And an extension of that highly visual, physical storytelling was the explosion of puppetry. When we talk about South African theater, we simply must discuss the Handspring Puppet Company.
Oh, they became internationally famous, most notably for creating those incredible life-sized horses for the play War Horse.
Their technical skill is unmatched globally. But in the context of our deep dive into South African history, their collaboration with artist William Kentridge on Ubu and the Truth Commission is seminal.
Right, going back to the TRC plays.
Yes. They used puppetry not as children's entertainment, but as a profoundly serious psychological tool.
So how does a puppet help tell a story about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
Well, when dealing with the grotesque, graphic realities of apartheid atrocities, sometimes watching a human actor portray a perpetrator committing those acts is just, it's too much. The audience's brain short circuits, they shut down to protect themselves.
That makes sense. It's too real.
But a puppet, a stylized, carved, slightly abstracted wooden figure, creates a psychological buffer. It gives the audience just enough distance to engage with the horror, to listen to the dialogue without triggering that immediate defensive shutdown.
That is an incredible use of the medium. The puppet basically acts as a shield so the audience can actually absorb the truth.
Precisely.
Now, up until this point in our deep dive, we've been looking at theater mostly as an art form you watch. You buy a ticket, you sit in the dark, you observe the physical theater or the puppets, and you go home.
Right.
But the research outlines a massive pivot toward theater as a tool you use.
And this brings us to applied theater and community theater. This is where the boundaries between art, social work, and activism completely dissolve.
I was really struck by the concept of animateurs in the notes. These aren't like directors trying to get famous in the city. They are specialized theater workers who go directly into marginalized communities.
Yes, to help ordinary people create plays about their own daily lived experiences, whether that's human rights issues, xenophobia, or HIV struggles.
Right. Organizations like the Market Theater Laboratory or the Mother Tongue Project, which specifically use storytelling to help women process trauma and build empowerment.
And we also see Brett Bailey's work developing a theater of ritual, integrating indigenous traditions like chanting, drumming, and trance into the performance.
Moving it away from European style.
Exactly, moving the whole concept of theater away from European traditions and grounding it deeply in an African spiritual context. It is about giving the tools of storytelling back to the people living the stories.
Which is so powerful.
But the absolute climax of this concept, the most radical application of theater as a tool, is theater for development.
Yeah.
Specifically, a method called forum theater.
Yes. Oh, this is the part of the research that completely blew my mind. It was heavily influenced by the work of educators and theater practitioners like Paulo Freire and Augusto Boal. I need to walk through the mechanics of this because it is wild.
Go for it.
In traditional theater, you sit in the dark and stay quiet. In forum theater, the audience is entirely active.
The setup is deliberately provocative. A group of actors will stage a short scene depicting a real unresolved problem in that specific community.
Like what kind of problem?
It might be a conflict over a corrupt local official demanding bribes, a dispute about water resources, or maybe a family dealing with an abusive dynamic. The scene plays out, and it is intentionally designed to end badly for the protagonist. The system wins, the individual loses.
But then, and this is the crazy part, the facilitator steps out, stops the play, and turns to the audience. They ask, what should the character have done differently? How do we beat this system?
And here is the genius part.
Yeah. The audience members cannot just sit in their chairs and shout theoretical advice. If you have an idea, you have to physically walk onto the stage, tag out the actor playing the protagonist, take their place, and act out your proposed solution in real time.
And the actors on stage don't just let you in.
No.
They improvise against you, maintaining the stubborn obstacles, the bureaucracy, and the pushback of the real world.
It is literally a live-action multiplayer choose-your-own-adventure game. But the stakes are actual real-world survival. You aren't just intellectually debating a problem in an academic echo chamber. You are physically rehearsing the solution with your neighbors.
This raises an important question for all of us. Think about how we currently try to solve our societal problems. We argue in comment sections, we write angry op-eds, we debate theory.
Oh, constantly.
Forum theater forces you to test your theory in a shared physical space. It bridges the massive gap between knowing what is morally right and actually knowing how to execute that action when a corrupt official is standing in front of you yelling in your face. It turns the stage into a practical laboratory for social change.
A laboratory for social change. That encapsulates this entire journey perfectly, honestly. Yeah. We started by asking how a country reinvents its identity after the monumental shift of 1994.
And we found our answer.
Yeah, looking at all this history, it's so clear that contemporary South African theater was never just about entertainment. It had to be a courtroom for the TRC, a therapist's couch for exploring fractured identities, a biting political cartoon when the new leadership failed.
And ultimately, a live-action laboratory where everyday people could literally practice changing their own lives.
They took that shattered mirror, and instead of just staring at the cracks, they used the broken glass to build a completely new lens to see the future.
Beautifully said. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. Building on that idea of forum theater.
I'll lay it on us.
We've seen how this method allows an audience to step in and literally rewrite the ending of a conflict on stage. Think about the biggest, most polarized conflict in your own community right now. What would happen if, instead of arguing on the internet or shouting past each other on social media, the fiercely opposed sides had to physically act out the problem together on a stage and allow the community to step in and try to fix it?
Now that is a deep dive worth taking on your own. Thank you so much for joining us and exploring this incredibly rich history with us today. We love sharing these discoveries with you, and we will catch you on the next one.